tell them, what it is that you think you bring to the table. Find your brand, find your unique differentiator, your superpower, whatever you want to call it. And those are the types of things you want to play up.
James is a 41-year-old consultant who's built a notable business in Denver over the last 9 years. Recently, he was approached and interviewed for a consulting contract with a well-established service company in New York City. If James wins this contract, it'll be a huge step up for him and his company. He really wants the contract, but he hasn't won it yet. He is one of 5 consultants who have made it to the final interview. The owner of the New York company realizes that this position has a vital public dimension to it, so she wants to see these applicants on their feet in an informal setting before making her final decision. She invites all 5 to a party on Manhattan's East Side. I'm Ken Newhouse. To me, building a profitable business isn't only about generating leads and driving sales. It's about who we are and what we're made of. I succeed in business by finding the most effective methods to persuade, inspire, and ignite the imagination of others, and find the most effective methods to persuade, inspire, and ignite the imagination of others to succeed in business. I am the new breed of entrepreneur. Join us on the quest as we search for the newest and most effective methods you can use to get clients now. Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the Get Clients Now podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Carson Heady, a gentleman with an extraordinary resume. Heady is, number one, an employee at the Microsoft Corporation, been there for quite some time. He's a 7-time CEO award winner. He's a globally ranked sales leader and trainer, and he's also a best-selling author of multiple books. And the latest book, which is going to be the topic of our discussion today, Salesman on Fire, is an absolutely incredible book. Before I dive into the interview, I want to encourage you to stay to the end of the episode today because I have a very special message of hope and good news for you. Now, I've got nothing to sell or nothing to sign up for. It's nothing like that. It's just something I want to share with you that can give you a better perspective on things and help to brighten your day. My guest today is Mr. Carson Heady, best-selling author of multiple books, but the book we're going to be talking about today is called Salesman on Fire. Now, I just want to say before we get started that even though the title says, quote-unquote, salesman, what we're going to be covering today does not simply apply to sales professionals. What we're going to be covering on today's show applies to dentists, chiropractors, coaches, consultants, online marketers. If you have to engage, whether it's online, face-to-face, now virtually through Zoom, with a prospect, with a prospective client, customer, or patient, the principles and strategies that we're going to be covering today are definitely applicable to you and will definitely benefit you and your business and your results. So Carson, on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, I want to welcome you to the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Ken. Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here.
Carson, one of the things that I like to do with all of my guests is I like to start off by asking them about their backstory, kind of how they got to where they are now, where they came from. And I know in your instance, it's kind of a unique case. On one hand, you got your foot in the corporate world. You've been working at Microsoft now for a long time. And then also you've got your own coaching and consulting business. And on top of that, you're a best-selling author on sales and some of the other things. And this latest book is absolutely fabulous. But if you could, take a minute or two, give us your backstory. I want to help each listener of the show get a good understanding of where you were and how you got to where you are now, and how you're essentially pulling triple duty between your job at Microsoft, your coaching and consulting company, and the fact that you've written another best-selling book.
I'd love to. And thanks again for the chance to chat today. It's been an interesting ride, and it continues to unfold in unexpected ways. I started out in sales with AT&T. It was Southwestern Bell at the time, and spent several years there, several different verticals. Started with the telecom business, and then went into advertising. And then I spent time in wireless there, and Verizon and T-Mobile. But most of the groups that I worked with were some of the dealers and the agents. So working with a shoestring budget and helping these guys to get clients and to drive marketing campaigns on grassroots marketing. And then I worked for a consultant firm for a little bit of time. And that's where I learned a lot of the prospecting mechanisms that I've been able to translate into the corporate game. I've been with Microsoft for about 6.5 years. There was an incredible blessing that happened about 10 years ago. I was in between roles. I'd been laid off at AT&T. I was in the Yellow Pages, and that game was changing substantially. So I was laid off there and actually got a book published by a publisher in New York. And it's called Birth of a Salesman. And obviously, I haven't sold enough copies to retire. But the wonderful thing about that book is it created relationships all over the world. And for the last decade, I've been very fortunate to be able to have conversations with different employers. In fact, I landed my next job with Verizon because of that book, because of my brand. So I've learned a lot about creating brand and, the ability to leverage branding of yourself, the importance of that, and then how to create relationships and how to nurture them. Which has been very valuable, not only in the world as we knew it a few years back, but even in light of this year in the pandemic, creating new relationships across the board. These are skills that have translated very well. So, that's me in a nutshell. Lifelong learner, always looking to create new relationships and really see where I can add value. And I've been very fortunate in that regard.
Carson, that's awesome that you just said that. Let me just say this before I dive into the next question. There's a huge difference between your personal brand and how you approach branding for your personal brand as opposed to the brand for your business. We've got dentists who listen to the show, chiropractors, and then we've got people who are consultants and coaches, people who are online marketers, people who own Facebook ad agencies. And so there's a lot of different types of professionals who listen to the show, but it's absolutely critical that you understand the difference between your business brand and your personal brand. And then you also understand how to approach the marketing strategy when you're trying to market your personal brand versus your business brand, because they're distinctly different. Now, having said that, Carson, what's something about you that the marketplace, as a general rule, doesn't know about you, but in fact, you'd like them to know?
It's a great question. I think that I'm an introvert and a sentimentalist at heart, which is probably ironic to hear because I've spent, when I was at AT&T, I'd get up in front of sales folks every day, hundreds of them, and give speeches that would remind you of the Wolf of Wall Street.
As the evening for the final interview approaches, James readies himself in his West Side hotel room. He'll need all his confidence to pull this evening off a success, but he's filled with doubts. Fear knots his middle as he paces the room, telling himself he was a fool to come east. These New York sharks will eat him alive. He flings clothes out of his suitcase, trying on this, trying on that, but each thing looks worse than the thing before. His hair is an uncombable tangle of frizz. As he grapples with his clothes and hair, he decides to pack it in and save himself the humiliation. Then a guilt-tripping phone call from his wife reminds him of yet another reason he needs this contract. New York sharks are formidable, but can't compare with the great white back home. Suddenly, he amazes himself with a combination of suit, shirt, and tie he's never tried before. His hair falls magically into place. He plants himself in front of a mirror looking great, eyes bright, glowing with confidence.
But, I've always been trying to do things from a branding perspective, video and putting content out there fearlessly. I recommend that to people that I coach and train as well, because, you can't, I've had some things that I put out there that have been, that have fallen flat, and then others that have done quite well and gotten a lot of hits, gotten a lot of interest. But I think, I'm an introvert and I'm a sentimentalist at heart. And I've trained myself to be able to get out there and create these relationships because they're so valuable. You've got to be willing to take those steps, make those risks, because the dividends they'll pay will be infinitely valuable. I've met so many amazing people over the last several years. But, at the end of the day, I like to spend a quiet evening with my family and, block everything else out. So if there's one thing kind of at the heart of me, that'd be it.
So Carson, like I mentioned earlier, you've been working with Microsoft now for several years, 6, 8, 10 years at least. Now you're also a best-selling author and you've got a coaching and consulting business. And what I'd like to know is, how did all this start? You've got a great career, great job at Microsoft, and then you decide to start writing these books, and they're actually best-selling books, and then you start a coaching and consulting business that's also very, very successful. I know in the book that you've got a character named Vincent Scott, which I guess is sort of a conglomeration of all the different lessons you've learned over the years working in sales and sales training. But how did you make the decision to have an awesome job at Microsoft and then start a coaching and consulting business, and on top of that, decide to start writing books, and in fact, like I said before, best-selling books?
Yeah, so Vincent's any guy. I mean, he's every man. He's every salesman. He's a conglomeration of a lot of folks that I've known over the years. And so it's ironic, a lot of people ask me about the book and how that all transpired. I never knew what I wanted to do. And in some ways, I'm still learning that. I've been very fortunate over the last several years with some of the roles that I've been able to get. But I always enjoyed writing, and I always enjoyed learning, and I always enjoyed reading, and I always wanted to write a book. And I wrote a lot of columns when I was at AT&T. They were sales related. I had no intention of getting into sales either. I was working at a grocery store through college, and I had a friend of a relative, and a friend of a relative ended up helping me get a role at Southwestern Bell at the time. I thought it was going to be a service role. It was a sales role, and kind of the rest was history. And once I was able to spend time in that environment, learn a lot of those types of fundamentals, as we talked about, I've kind of bounced back and forth between corporate gigs and non-corporate gigs, working in consultant functions and working with, dealers, independent organizations. So it all kind of came about through happenstance. And I think a lot of times that's how it works. It's being open to opportunity, seeing some of these opportunities and being able to follow them for the values and the lessons that they can bring. I wrote the book because I was gifted with time, and then I was just very diligent in selling that. We were talking earlier a little bit about brand, and I started to learn about a decade ago about the value of brand. When I got laid off from a job and I thought my director credentials would get me in the door somewhere else very quickly, I was wrong. So I had to teach myself how to create relationships, how to create content, how to build a brand. And, you look at it now, it makes a lot of sense. But back then I didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to do different things that set up a LinkedIn, establish that, set up a Twitter, try to figure out this social media game, which I don't profess to know very much about sometimes, but it has worked in creating relationships and funneling me to different places. In fact, I probably learned more at the consultant firm that I worked at a few years back about actually prospecting because I had no brand name. I had to create my own reasons for why would this person want to talk to me. And so it's been a journey. And the books are a byproduct of that. A lot of learnings, a lot of things that I've encountered and seen and experienced and heard about over the last several years. It's ideally my way of trying to give back. But it really all happened because of the opportunities that I was fortunate enough to be in and the things I learned along the way.
All right, Carson, I just had a thought in my mind, and now I've got another question. This is not a scripted question. It's not on my list of questions. But I'd like you to do this in very quick, succinct, bulleted format, like rapid fire. What I'd like you to do is give me an answer, each answer maybe 15 to 30 seconds long. But what are 2, 3, maybe 4 elements that are really, really important for personal branding success?
Number 1 is creation of content. And number 2 is leveraging that content in an effective way. And what I mean by that is the creation of content is one thing. I think a lot of people are hesitant to put something out there. They're not sure what will be the result. And frankly, you just have to create.
Under the hotel marquee, thunder, lightning, pelting down rain. Because he's from Denver, he didn't know to tip the doorman $10 when he registered, so he won't go out into the storm to find him a cab. Besides, when it rains in New York, there are no cabs. So James studies his visitor map, pondering what to do. He realizes if he tries to run from the West 80s over to Central Park West, then all the way down CPW to 59th Street across Central Park, south to Park Avenue, and up until the East 80s, he'll never get to his event on time.
As I mentioned before, I've had posts and blogs and things like that I've created that fell completely flat, but I've had others that have had tens of thousands of hits. And so I think one of them is just being willing to create the content and put it out there. Second is that effective distribution of that content. How are you going to leverage those types of things to build and promote your brand? You are your own product in a lot of cases. So you've got to make sure that what you're putting out there is indicative of what your mission statement is. But frankly, you also got to look at, what are your motives? What are your driving forces? I didn't write a book to make a lot of money. Obviously, nobody does. I did it so that I could create relationships and I felt like I could add value in that regard. But how do I promote that? Well, trying to find different mediums in order to make relationships, create relationships. A few years back, I did outreach to be on shows like this, and I don't have to do that anymore. I can create relationships organically because of the content that's been created and my brand is out there. Now I'm tweaking and evolving that all the time just to make sure that it's on the right trajectory. But I think those two things are critical, Ken.
Well, Carson, first of all, you took action over time. Some of the actions were profound. Most of them were small, simple steps that over time, whether it's in the process of creating and building and distributing the content, and then making those connections, creating relationships with people over time, and that's really started to pay off for you. That's point number one. Those are really, really important steps that you took. In fact, there's a lesson to be learned for all of us there. Taking small actions over time will eventually start to really pay off for you. So there's a lesson. Pay attention to that. But secondly, here's my question. What was your earliest memory of when you actually realized the massive importance of being able to develop high-level professional sales skills? You know, in selling, whether or not we're a quote-unquote sales professional, we're all in the business of selling. We're all in the business of getting people to take the actions that we want them to take. And so in that arena, in that setting, we have to be able to understand human behavior. We have to understand how people think and why they do the things that they do as much as possible. I know that's very difficult in some instances, but it's certainly doable. We also need to be able to tell stories. You know, you're going to be able to make a lot more sales, generate a lot more business if you are an accomplished storyteller. You also have to understand elements of ethical persuasion. These are all very, very important skill sets to have. But is there a time in your life when, you know, the light really came on and you said to yourself, hey, listen, if I want to have exceptional success in business, I got to take this sales thing very, very seriously, and I got to develop some skill sets?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, as I mentioned, I had no real intention of getting into sales. I realized quickly, because I was fielding B2B and eventually B2C calls from different folks, that it was my gift for gab and willingness to listen and actually leverage the customer's own words in kind of crafting what would come back out of my mouth. Those were things that were working. It was resonating. And it was because I was able to directly tie those types of things. And I mean, this was 20 plus years ago. It was because I was able to directly tie those things into what my recommendation would be. That's where I found success. And, you know, here's the thing. If you work in sales, there's so many different templates and, you know, scripts and different things. You know, in the corporate world, you know, a lot of times they give you what they want you to say. That's not always a perfect format because you've got to be a person. You've got to be a human. You've got to be relatable. You've got to understand where the customer is. You've got to truly care. I did. And, you know, when these folks would call in and they needed something or there was a situation that had gone awry, getting to the heart of that and just listening and not taking it personally because, you know, they're obviously going to throw everything under the sun that they dislike your company or they feel like they've been wronged. But the reason that I found that I could set myself apart from all the other sellers that may not be doing as well as they could be was because I could be unique in that regard. I could actually listen. I could actually spend the time to get things done.
James realizes that getting this contract could transform his business and his life. His consulting business has done well, but there's no doubt he could have been making more money had he gone to work for a large corporation. And while he lives in a nice home and drives a nice car, his wife has been reminding him of this fact more and more over the last 18 months. But James believes in himself and his company, and getting a job and working for someone else isn't in the plans he's made for his future.
What's great about working for yourself or working in a setting where it's your own organization is you have the ability, there's nobody telling you what that blueprint looks like. You get to craft that and create it. And you can really, truly put the customers at the heart of everything that you do. I think sometimes in corporate settings, a lot of times that can get lost. The intentions can be good, but the execution might suffer because of different metrics and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, when you run your own shop, you can really, truly put customers at the heart and define what that means. And I think my earliest memories of that still ring true today because I realized I could talk, but listening was at the heart of it and really, truly using what was coming out of the customer's mouth as the reason for the direction that I wanted to take them is what worked out successfully.
You know, Carson, I'm actually really glad that you brought that up because listening is one of those skills that's critically important to your success in any profession that you're in. So whether you're a professional salesperson, whether you're a chiropractor or a dentist or a coach or a consultant, it doesn't matter. If you have to get people to accept your recommendations and then give you money, listening is a skill that you must become exceptionally good at. Because gone are the days, in fact, long gone are the days when we could just talk at our prospects, we need to be able to listen, as I like to say, listen between the lines, because when you listen between the lines, you're going to be able to pick up on things that your prospect, even your client, is telling you that they're not actually saying with words. So maybe the tone of their voice, their syntax, the vernacular, the words they choose, all of those things, their body language, all of those things are critically important. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's very, very important. But let's do this. Let's turn our sights towards your book. And so what I'd like to know is, what was your intention for writing the book, Salesman on Fire?
Ken, I intend on writing another book. It had been a few years since I had written anything. And, I'd love to dabble into other things. And, I'm pretty tied up with my day job. And obviously I have a family that I love. So I just didn't really have any intention of writing anymore. I'm a big reader, and there's a new Bond movie that hopefully will come out at some point. And I started reading a bunch of the Bond novels again. I had read them all as a kid, and I started reading them all again. There was a biography of Bond that was written by a biographer that wrote one of Ian Fleming several years ago, I believe in the 70s. And I had never read that biography. It was a biography of James Bond, and it actually came out across like he was a real character. The biographer finds him in his 50s. He's worn, he's weathered, and the question the whole time is like, is he up for one more mission? But he recounts a lot of things from his childhood, from different missions, some that we obviously know because we've seen the films or we've read the books. And so I read that and I was inspired by it.
No matter what, James has made up his mind that he has to get to this event tonight. So he decides to do what they warn you never, ever to do: run through Central Park at night. He covers his head with a newspaper and darts into the night, daring death.
So this character I'd created 10 years ago, Vincent Scott, I thought to myself, well, what if I sat down and I interviewed this character? Because that was the premise of this Bond book. And so I always try to bring something unique to the table. There's so many great sales and leadership books out there, and I know I can't recreate that, and I know I can't do anything better than what's already out there. So I wouldn't write anything unless I knew that I could do something unique with unique flair, with a unique idea. And so that was the one that I kind of thought of, hey, this hasn't been done, a sales book where somebody interviews somebody else in this type of fashion, because a lot of mine are parable-esque, like 5 dysfunctions of a team. It's a book inside a book. So I tried to take that concept and I thought about it. And, so it's me personally going and physically sitting down with this gentleman, spending kind of a day in the life, looking back over some hits and misses from his career, and then obviously bringing the audience up to speed of what's transpired with this guy for the last decade. So it was fascinating to do it. I journal a lot, and I think, no matter what role you're in and what you do in your career, you should journal, because it really helps you to look back on different things that you've learned along the way. Things start to make sense that maybe you jotted down 6 months or a year ago. And it's amazing the learning that we can have. So I try to fuel some of those lessons, some new lessons, and then just kind of a revisitation of a character that I hadn't visited in a while.
So in the book, you actually mentioned your desire to invest more time with quote unquote mentors. So I want to ask you a twofold question. This is kind of a bulleted format, and take like a minute or two for each. But question one is, why would a business professional need a mentor? Business professional could be a coach, consultant, an online marketer, could be a sales professional, could be a dentist, a chiropractor, anyone who's in business for themselves, who has to generate exchange with a prospect or a client, i.e., I'm going to provide a service or a product to you in exchange. You're going to give me money. And the second part of that question is, how do you actually approach prospective mentors for the purposes of having them mentor you? So as an example, let's say that I identified a particular person that I wanted to mentor me. How would I go about approaching that person and saying, hey, listen, I'd like you to invest your time with me. I know you got a busy schedule, but I want you to invest your time with me so that I can become more successful, more like you. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's funny. That was something that I didn't realize until my career had really matured and I had matured personally. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time just kind of flying solo and doing my own thing. And I thought my perspective was that I was onto something. And I realized very quickly, and as I got older, that there was a lot that I still had to learn. And I gravitated towards certain people that were doing what I wanted to do or what I thought I wanted to do. Some of those could be managers, people that were in roles above me, but oftentimes it was people that were maybe even at other organizations or people in my own organization, but in totally different elements of that role that might be doing something that I gravitated toward. And I think the key is there's nowadays there's always ways to approach people, whether it's, email, if it's somebody that works in your organization or not, or even LinkedIn. I've leveraged LinkedIn a lot. I mean, obviously, full disclosure, Microsoft owns them now, so I'm not endorsing a product, but I use the heck out of LinkedIn. And the ability to create relationships with LinkedIn, I've been able to, number one, even when you're looking for a job, asking for a job is not the way to get a meeting with somebody. Asking for advice, asking for guidance. We live in a world where, frankly, a lot of people are very willing to give of their time to have a conversation about advice, feedback, key learnings. So I'd always send a polite note and just say, hey, with your experience with some of the mutual interests, and maybe I'd call out a couple of those. Yeah, I'd love to just get a little bit of your time to get any feedback or guidance you may have. I'm interested in parlaying my experience into your industry or whatever I was trying to do at the time.
A lightning flash and bang, and suddenly he's surrounded by that gang that's always out there, rain or shine, waiting for the fools who run through the park at night. But he didn't invest the last 12 years training in mixed martial arts for nothing. With slashing elbows, devastating kicks to the legs, and knees to the face, he fights his way through the gang, breaking jaws, scattering teeth on the concrete, until he stumbles out of the park alive.
And the mentor relationships can look so different, Ken, as you know. I mean, some of them could be an ongoing, you've got a cadence, you talk to them once a month, you have coffee, you now have virtual meetings or whatever that looks like. Some of them might be a one-off. I mean, you have a conversation with somebody that you really want to meet with. And I think nowadays it's amazing. Some of the people that I've been able to connect with over the last several years, people that are considered luminaries of sales, as an example, like Jeffrey Gitomer, Jeb Blunt. I've had a lot of very interesting conversations with people. And so people are willing to meet. You've got to cast the right size of net, I suppose. Not everybody's going to take that meeting or take that call. And they may not take that meeting or call today, but it doesn't mean you don't try again in 6 months or a year or whatever that looks like. I've had people that have taken my call in recent years, but 5 years ago, I couldn't get a hold of them. So identify who you want to talk to and why. There's got to be something maybe that they're doing that you want to learn from and you've identified. Think about your messaging. It's all about learning and seeking feedback, seeking guidance. Maybe you call out a couple of things that really resonated with you, that gravitated you toward them, and then figure out what you want that relationship to look like. And it's going to continue to evolve. I have mentors that I talk to sporadically now. Unfortunately, I wish I talked to them more. I'm busy, they're busy, but we're always in touch and we're always staying top of mind with each other. Social media has an amazing way of doing that. And even in light of the pandemic, a lot of people that I'd worked with before that have been my mentors or that I've mentored, I sent them notes, I sent them LinkedIn video messages, just to say, hey, just to check in, make sure that they're doing okay. And I think that that's where you can set yourself apart in a mentor relationship is quality touches and, just finding ways to stay connected.
All right, Carson. So here's what I want to do next. I want to take direct quotations from your book. And I think this is where in the book you ask the fictitious character, Vincent Scott, a specific question. And then in turn, he gave you a very long answer, but I'm going to limit your answer, say, to a minute or two. So if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and read the quote, and then I'm going to get your response to that quote. Here we go. What is the most important component or attribute of successful sales? Go.
Relationships. It's all about people. People and process, but you can't do anything with the right people in place. And I think that's why it's so critical to focus on the people that are surrounding you. I believe in a sales food chain, and it's the customers at the heart of it. The people that you work with, your colleagues, your partners, your business partners, the different people that you touch, they're all a part of that food chain. But you got to make sure that you do everything you can to invest in all of the relationships that you touch.
All right, so Carson, before we actually started the interview, you and I were talking about the Chinese coronavirus and then obviously the recession that's occurring as a result of it. But I want to go ahead and pick back up where we left off in the pre-call where we were talking about this and tie that into a question that I have that was based on something you taught in the book. So now that we're actually all facing the challenges, and there are many, many challenges as a result of the Chinese coronavirus, and again, like I said, the recession, how can we as business owners, whether we're a dentist, a chiropractor, a coach, consultant, an online marketer, a Facebook marketing agency owner, professional salesperson, doesn't matter, but how can we maintain focus and positivity in the face of all these challenges and hurdles we have? Yeah,
no, that's a phenomenal question, Ken. Faith has been critical during this time. it's something that's, we're obviously looking to where we're being pulled and what are the things that we can be learning right now. Look at any crisis you've ever been through in your life and your career. Keeping a steady hand on the wheel is the most critical thing. Right now, it's more challenging than it's probably ever been for many, many folks. And so, obviously my heart and prayers are for a lot of the people that are grappling through that. But it's so important to keep an eye on the fundamentals. And now's the time where obviously you focus on people, you focus on relationships. I'm teaching a lot of folks right now how to and why to prospect more. This is not the time where you turn down any efforts to meet new clients, to take on new clients. And people are out there. People are able and willing to talk. And you're going to face more setbacks. And obviously, it can be a dampening cloud over your efforts. And that's why a lot of times in focusing, you just have to know that the steps you're taking are the right ones. Focusing on your existing clients, always, the warmest relationships that you have, making sure that you're a human being with them as well. I've seen a lot of situations right now where, we're taking price concessions and we're trying to work with people on bills and invoices and, trying to be, looking at where can we discount services in a way that makes sense. Fight to keep your existing clients and keeping happy, listening, meeting people where they are. So important. But on the next side of that, it's making new clients and doing things, referrals, outreach. I leverage social media a lot to meet new people. In every role that I've been in over the last decade, I've spent a lot of time with LinkedIn as an example, going out and just proactively meeting folks. You can cast a very wide net. You can meet folks with whatever title you want. You can send them requests to connect and tell them a brief blurb of why you want to connect. And think about the unique value that you can bring in those types of situations.
As James limps into the mirrored lobby of the Park Avenue apartment building, he realizes that he just escaped the jaws of death. Yes, he survived, but then he looks in a mirror and sees what appears to be a house cat that just crawled out of a swimming pool. Newspaper shredded in his hair, blood all over his clothes, the gang's blood, but blood nonetheless. His self-confidence plunges past doubt and fear until he bows in personal defeat, crushed by his social disaster. Just then, taxis pull up with the other consultants vying for the contract. All found cabs, all get out looking New York chic. They take pity on him and urge him to come with them into the elevator up to the party. He hesitates at first, but something inside him tells him to go. Yes, he's probably destroyed his chances of getting this contract, but a little voice whispers in his ear and encourages him to push past his doubts and fears and get in the elevator.
Now, when I was at a consulting firm working by myself, that value was really just perspective and feedback. The perspective that I felt that I could bring, and I wanted to bounce ideas off of them. So I just tried to create relationships. And frankly, I think right now, again, people are willing to have perspective building conversations. So I think that's a key thing to be doing. But also, even in corporate America, there's a value that you can bring at whatever your role is, and your goal is to connect. It's a numbers game. I've massaged the language that I've used over the years that I've used for outreach and gotten to the point, about 40% of the folks that I try to connect with, I can connect with. And then try to reach out and build toward a conversation. Just focus on what you're actually trying to do, put one foot in front of the other. Just stay focused on that. And every day, just continue to try. And I hate using cliches, but just try to continue to plant seeds that are going to lead to future harvest. You can only focus on one thing at a time and the day at a time. And I talk to a lot of folks that have lost their jobs and they're looking and they're having challenges finding roles. There's only so much that you can do, but some of these folks are reading a lot. They're taking certification tests for other things. So they're investing in self. So even if you're not seeing the gains you want, look for additional ways to invest in yourself for what you may be doing next.
Yeah, Carson, I totally agree. So whether we're dealing with the pandemic or recession or whatever it is, one of the primary tenets that we work with our clients and our members and our coaching groups with is that you can never overinvest in your skill sets, in your preparedness, and your ability to serve and deliver value to the marketplace. So literally, I couldn't agree more. All right, so now that I've said that, I want to ask you another set of questions, and we're going to look at these from two different vantage points. Specifically, one of the questions deals with pre-pandemic circumstances, and the other question, it's going to be slightly different, deals with from the viewpoint of, hey, we're in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic right now, we're in the middle of a recession. So question one would be, why do you think in the quote unquote sales presentation, in the sales interaction where you're dealing with a prospective patient, a prospective customer, or a prospective client in a very high value, high stakes situation, why do you think it was pre-pandemic, mind you, that sales professionals and business owners were failing at that? And then question number two is from the viewpoint of, hey, we're in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. We're in the middle of this recession. Although the economy is definitely getting better, what are the biggest challenges sales professionals and business owners are facing now? And how can they overcome them while we're dealing with the recession caused by the Chinese coronavirus?
Yeah, Ken, and I think the reasons are frankly quite similar, just a little bit different flavor. Pre-pandemic, salespeople failed because they were not consistent in their values and their application of process and fundamentals. I think a lot of us, we may see something that we want to try or we want to do. We think it's a great idea. We go out. It doesn't necessarily have the exact effect that we think it should. And then we just stop doing it. People aren't willing to put forth that effort on a consistent basis because you get knocked down. You lose deals. You have, I've had losses that have just been devastating. But it's what you do after that matters most. And I think when some of these folks go out and they knock on 20 doors in a day, or they call 100 or 500 customers and they have a bad day, they just stop trying. They stop adhering to the processes that could and should work. I see it all the time with prospecting. I train folks on prospecting. They get it. They're like, yeah, this is working great. And then they do it. And then, a couple of weeks in, they've stopped. They might have had a good conversation or two, but then they don't follow through on the process. People and process are critical to sales. And so if you don't adhere enough to putting people at the heart of what you're doing, and you don't adhere to a process consistently, you will not be successful. It's that simple. But if you put both at the heart of what you're doing, the results will be there. They will, every time, guaranteed.
As James and the elevator ascend towards the penthouse, from deep within him comes a confidence he never knew he had. He not only tells them about his battle in the park, but he makes jokes about it. In the penthouse, they give James some towels and find mismatched clothes for him to wear. And because he looks like this, the spotlight's on him all night. And because he knows he's lost anyway, he relaxes into his natural self. As he tells his adventure to the curious, mouths go slack with awe or wide with laughter. At the end of the evening, the executives and the company president know exactly who they want for their job. Anyone who can face his doubts and fears, go through that terror in the park and display this kind of cool a half an hour later is clearly the person for them. The evening ends on his personal and social triumphs, and he's given the job.
As for now, it's very similar in the vein that if you didn't have the relationships before, you're sure not going to have them right now. There's a built-in empathy right now, Ken, and I think that's something that we're seeing where there's an expectation now when I'm on video calls that somebody's kid's going to be crying and a dog's going to be barking. So it's like there's this built-in opportunity to be personable with people. In fact, I'm surprised my dog hasn't barked yet. There's this built-in opportunity to just be a person with people. It's amazing to me because I've been with some very senior people on calls in recent months, and like their kid was screaming in the background, and I was able to say, hey, mine's probably going to do the same thing here any minute. I feel the same way. And it's almost helped to make relationships closer. So I think pre-pandemic, if you didn't already have some of these relationships, then it's probably going to be a little bit more challenging right now. But right now, you've got this golden opportunity to forge new relationships. People have, in some ways, more time on their hands because I don't commute anymore. I don't have to go to do a lot of face-to-face type of stuff. So I've got some built-in time back into my day in some regards. How are you going to use that time? And I think it's easier to get people to talk to you, at least right now. At least that's what I've seen. So if you follow the processes that worked pre-pandemic, I think you can get conversations. And I think that's where, people that are failing now perhaps don't see that built-in opportunity. They're maybe trying some of the old ways that worked pre-pandemic, or maybe it didn't. And I think you have to realize the time that we're in, be personable, invest in relationships, cast a very wide net, try to meet and talk to as many people as you can and understand where they're coming from. And if you do that, I think you can be successful because people have money. They may have to move it around. They may have to use it differently. they're making investments. Obviously, they're just having to be very selective about how they're spending any additional dollars. So try to find ways to differentiate, try to find ways to add new value. You were just talking about healthcare. Look at the jump in telemedicine and the way some of these folks are leveraging data and the different things that are being offered as differentiated solutions to patients in light of a pandemic. How can you transform your offerings in a way that will meet people where they are, add value, keep you top of mind, but create new potential relationships?
That's good, Carson. That's really good. I know it can be really difficult to look for solution, to be solution oriented when your whole world's been yanked out from under you. And certainly I don't want to minimize anything that anyone's going through, because some of the people that I know have actually lost their businesses and they may have to file bankruptcy due to no fault of their own. Thank you, China. But having said that, as much as possible, it's always best not to focus on the challenges that we have, but to focus on solutions, to be looking for solutions as much as possible. Carson, I want to ask you about your book, and I want to ask you kind of an unusual question. You know, your book is written in a very unusual format. It's an awesome book, but it's in an unusual format. It's a story-based format, but it's also a how-to book. So you've combined the secrets of sales success that you've learned over time and put that in a narrative story format, which I think was brilliant. But what about writing Salesman on Fire actually surprised you most?
Honestly, how different of an experience it was writing it than anything else that I've ever done. I get writer's block, and I was stuck on concepts for years. I mean, you always get little ideas here and there, like, hey, maybe I could write this or that. And it didn't feel right. And I think what surprised me was just how natural it felt, because I could picture myself sitting down, talking to this guy and having a dialogue, and what would he say and how would that conversation flow? And, how would this guy feel? I mean, anybody that's been in sales or, had a career that's lasted for 10, 20, 30 years, I mean, you carry some things along with you. I mean, there's going to be some regrets, probably. There's going to be some life lessons learned, but there certainly is going to be a desire to impart knowledge. And I think people nowadays, there's a genuine desire to help others just because of the spirit of the people that are around right now and just what's going on in the world. And I think that's what it was really trying to embody. It was that here's this guy who's been in sales for 20 years and, he's learned a lot. He's got a few regrets. He really just wants to share and add value. And he's learned a ton. And I think that was what was reflective of it. But I think that's what surprised me, is just how naturally I felt like it flowed, easier than anything else that I've ever written.
So Carson, do you have time for, let's say, one more question? And then we're going to talk about how people can find out more about you, your business, your consulting and coaching services, about the different books that you've written. And before I do that, let me just say this. This is an incredible book. And like with every guest I have on the Get Clients Now podcast, you're going to invest in this book. You're going to read it. You're going to make multiples of your time and the money you invest in the book. And certainly I know this. I know that your time and my time are like the most valuable asset we can have as it relates to business and as it relates to life. This is what I always tell my clients. We tell our coaching members, you can always get more clients. You can always make more money. Yes, even in the middle of coronavirus, the pandemic, and this recession, you can always get more clients. You can always get more money, but you can't get more time. And so I appreciate and understand the value of your time, and I don't make recommendations for these books lightly. That's why I'm very careful to have only top-notch guests on my show. But having said that, you're going to invest in Carson's book. You're going to read it. You're going to take action on the lessons you've learned, and you're going to make multiples of the time and money you invested in this book. Here's my last question, Carson, and then we'll get into contact information and more information about you. What's the one question that I should have asked you today that I didn't ask?
That's a tough one to answer, Ken, because your questions were spot on. I like the way our conversation flowed, and I think that's the sign of a good interviewer, is just good conversation and a natural flow. But really maybe advice for professionals at any stage that are, maybe at an impasse or a crossroads. I think right now we've got an interesting time where a lot of people are reflecting and they're looking at their career. They're wondering, would I, could I, should I make a move? Should I be looking at where things are going and these tectonic plates that are shifting? And maybe that would be the only thing that I could think about that you didn't hit on. And I would say this, two things. One, a friend of mine years ago because I was in a similar impasse. I mean, he told me, he was like, follow the zeros. He was like, look to the types of things people are investing in. The things that have the most zeros behind them, that's where you need to follow, because those are the types of things that you can sell. And if you're good at it, you can make a lot of money and make a lot of impact. But the second thing is that I would say is really look to what matters most to you and be transparent with the people that you touch, the people that you work with and work for. I'm so fortunate and blessed. I've been able to more or less create the type of role that I want in my life. It took a long time to get there. And I told a lot of people what I wanted to do and what I was interested in doing. But I finally found people that are willing to let me pretty much do what I want to do, both in my corporate career and obviously in what I do on the side with coaching and mentoring and writing. So I think, you look for relationships and you tell them, what it is that you think you bring to the table. Find your brand, find your unique differentiator, your superpower, whatever you want to call it. And those are the types of things you want to play up. I've got a friend of mine who puts that he's a saxophonist in his LinkedIn profile on the headline. It starts conversations. I wrote that book 10 years ago, and that was the only reason that my resume got noticed by my next employer. Figure out what it is that there is about you that you can leverage in your career in a positive way. I'm not a super technical person, but I work in technology and I've been successful here because of my ability to create relationships and build a community around what I'm doing. So figure out what your superpower is and how you can translate it into your work. Get good at that and communicate with other people that you touch about the types of opportunities that you think you can help bring to the table.
Carson, I know we can find out more information about you on LinkedIn. Carson Heady, that's Carson. Heady is Heady, Carson Heady on LinkedIn. But what's your website URL? I'd like people to find out more about your coaching and consulting services that you offer.
Yeah, I've repurposed my WordPress blog as more or less my de facto website. So there's links to that from LinkedIn, from Twitter. Those are probably the easiest places to find me, but definitely hit me up on LinkedIn and then check out my WordPress blog. It's called The Life and Times of Carson Heady. And silly name, came up with it years ago, just haven't changed it. But that's where that's kind of become my de facto site.
So like we heard from Carson today and like we learned from James's story, in tough times, especially in the toughest of times like we're facing today, you'll almost always fare better by focusing on and looking for solutions than you will be by focusing on and being paralyzed by your challenges. I don't know what you're going through, but I am intimately familiar with life's challenges. 26 years ago, I was hit head on by a fully loaded dump truck, 30 tons of asphalt in the back of the truck, no fault of my own. I was flown by Arch Helicopter to St. Louis University, where I spent almost a week in a coma. Like I said, I should have died. As a result, I lost everything. I had to file bankruptcy. I've gone through 18 surgeries since the accident, and every day I live with chronic pain. And most recently, me and the beautiful and talented Lisa, my wife, contracted COVID. In fact, I infected my elderly parents who were already sick. My dad has congestive heart failure, he's 82. My mom is chronically ill with an autoimmune disease. I infected both of them and my sister. I honestly believed I had killed my parents. Thankfully, again, by the grace of God, we survived. We're all doing better now. I don't know where you stand in your belief or if you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, but since I realized my need for a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I made the decision not to just attend church, not to just try to live a better life, but to actually turn my life over to Jesus Christ. And that's what being a Christian is. God created us for His pleasure and to serve Him. And whether you believe that or not, and it's lived out in my life and the lives of many other people, hundreds of thousands, millions of other people. And I wanted to give you a message of hope, to know that my life is under the direct control of the God of the universe, of the God who created all things, is a tremendous load I don't have to carry. And I just want to encourage you, if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I want to encourage you to pick up a Bible. If you look at the verse John 3:16, the Bible says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in Him should not perish, but will have everlasting life." If you're looking for hope, if you're looking for something to hold on to, I want to encourage you, based on my personal testimony, that Jesus Christ saved me, the joy I have in my life now, there's nothing like it I've ever had before. And with that, I want to thank you for being a loyal listener of the show, and I look forward to having you back on our next episode. Take care.
Our objective with this podcast is to help you and your business stand out in the marketplace by crystallizing your messaging, marketing, and communications. On behalf of the whole Kin Newhouse team, thanks for listening.